Hello, my name is Matrix. I am the flex support player for this team here. I have a pretty long competitive history, but I'm hoping to share some educational gameplay with everyone on how to properly play as a team. So, how about Wiz?
Hi, I'm Wiz, in-game name WizKid. I have probably a little bit under a year's time in the competitive scene of Overwatch. For about the last 4 to 5 months, I've been strictly just the coach for Neo Titan Gaming, recently renamed Neo Titan Gaming Sky Atlas.
Atlas Sky, you fool.
Atlas Sky, sorry. But before that, I was flex support or off support. Whatever you want to call that, for a couple of different teams. But yeah, that's a little bio from me. So you want to take it away from here?
Sure. I'm Hiisuya. I'm the off-tank player for Neo Titan Gaming, Atlas Sky. This is my first Overwatch team, the only team I've been with, and I've been with them for like 5 months now. So pretty wild.
All right, well, let's get started here. So first, we're going to go over some brief logistics for kind of what this stream is supposed to be. So first off, to address why we're doing this, right? So we noticed there's kind of a gap in between the competitive scene and individual scene as per guides, videos, kind of how to properly play, right? How to play Overwatch as a team. And so, you know, you can go find a guide on how to play D.Va, right? And mechanically how to use her, how to position, all that kind of stuff. And that's going to help you in competitive queue. But you won't be able to find how to play D.Va on this certain map in this certain composition with your team's type of play styles, right? So that's kind of what we're here to address, is that gap. Kind of trying to teach fundamentally how to play as a team. As kind of a brief introduction, right? So when people think of a dominant team, they may think of like the DPS players for NYXL or something, right? They might think of Pine's Widow or SBB's Tracer. They may even think of, you know, Jonax Zen, just because they're such strong individual players. And recently there was this Widow tournament that was happening in the Overwatch All-Star Games, right? And when Surefour won, he did kind of an announcement, and he said that any day, any one of them, right? Carpe, him, Pine, Fleta, whoever, they all have the ability to win. They're all such amazing players, and it really just depends on how they're feeling of that day of the week. And what makes the difference is how they put these mechanics into use within their team, right? So mechanics and individual improvement, they don't make up for team play. They're a part of it, right? But what's more important than that is the ability to play well within your team. You know, so if you take a bunch of all-star OWL players and you put them into a team, it doesn't guarantee that they're going to be the best team. They need to learn how to work together. They need to work around each other's play styles, have proper communication, and so much more, right? And that aspect of team play is what we're going to focus on here.
Okay, terminology. I'm going to try to keep this at a very general level, because any one of these terms could be kind of broken down and discussed for hours, honestly. So from a very basic level, here are kind of the primary terms that you'll kind of need to know going into a kind of team-based atmospheres. And a lot of this stuff you will kind of picked up from ladder play as well. But we're going to go ahead and define it a little bit more and kind of in relation to team play as well. So first and foremost, meta. And what a meta is it is the perceived strongest composition on a given map or point that works consistently. So for example, this would be like Dive on Watch Point, Ryan Zarya on King's Row. And there are multiple comps that people like to run on those maps. There are a lot of heroes that are deemed as strong. But what the meta is the heroes that you can kind of consistently, the comps that you can consistently get the most value out of. So they're usually, almost always, they are the most typical kind of form of a composition that is used on a map or a given point. Moving on, DPI, sensitivity, and eDPI. These are all terminology that revolves around the movement of your mouse and how you kind of interact with the 3D playing field inside Overwatch. So DPI and sensitivity are both just terminology used to kind of track like how far you move your mouse versus how far you will your mouse will actually move in game, like how far along the 360 degree plane will your character turn. And then EDPI, because DPI and sensitivity, sensitivity is usually a number that's allotted in game, and DPI is usually set outside of client, outside of Overwatch. And these numbers are both to be multiplied together, and then that's kind of your EDPI. And you can go a lot more into this on another video. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but there is a specified EDPI, so you kind of have to learn the equation and then figure out like if your EDPI is reasonable. And some people do have outliers, and we're again not going to get into that. That's out of the scope of this this little introductory video, but just little heads up. Hero roles. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard all the hero roles. So there's the main tank, and the main tank's hero pool would consist of like the Reinhardts, the Winstons, the Orissas. This is the heroes that usually mitigate a lot of damage and are there to kind of take space. Recently, Hammond's been ran a little bit more in the main tank role. And again, we're not going to get too in depth into defining like what exactly like a main tank does, but I'm just going to give some. I'm going to list the name of the role and give you guys a few heroes that typically are played in that role. All right, so the flex support or the off support. Flex support is kind of the newer terminology for that, but that is the Zen, occasionally the Lucio, but it's primarily Zen, Ana, Moira, and that's pretty much it. The main support is usually the Mercy and the Lucio. From a team mentality, that is how you would usually structure your hero pools for your supports. The main support will take the Mercy and the Lucio, and then the off support will pretty much fill the rest of the support cast. You have three different DPS that you could potentially add to the roster. You have a hit scan DPS, you have a projectile DPS, and you have a flex DPS. So hit scan and projectile, we'll talk a little bit more about that terminology later down the road, but that's just the type of fire that is used by that hero. So their primary fire is either hit scan, which means it's instantly registered. There's no travel time. And then projectile, which all the projectiles have a varying travel time, but you will have to lead the shot. It does not have an instant cast time. It does have to travel through the plane. And then you have flex, which is more or less just that person does not play either of those to a very strict level. They kind of play a little bit of both, have a little bit more of a niche hero pool. Sometimes you'll kind of get some wonkier hero pools typically from your flex DPS. Moving on, you have the off tank, which is your Zarya, your Diva, occasionally the Roadhog. That's Hiisuya over there. You have you have oh, that's all of them. That's all of them. Space versus LOS. Taking and making space can be done by pretty much all of the cast, but primarily it is done by your main tank in kind of coordination with the off tank to kind of present this front, like I said earlier, and to contest for space. So that's like your Winston kind of leaping in on the high ground, contesting the enemy for high ground. And what in a very general idea of Overwatch that is so that you contest that space so that your DPS do not have to contest the high ground, 1v6 and take a ton of focus. You're trying to create this area where your DPS can operate safely, right? Mm-hmm. And you can go way more into depth on like map control and like what's safe space and how do you take space. Like one of the heroes that probably controls space the best is Widowmaker. Any area that her sightline is holding, she controls it probably better than almost any hero in the game. Granted, that space is only controlled as well as the Widow can hit the shot, and it's very hard for your Widow to kind of get set up, and then you kind of get really into like depth of like how do you take space, um, and like the nuances of holding and taking space. Synergies. Uh, this is how well two or more people on your team kind of are able to work in conjunction from like a pretty like natural level. Like there isn't a ton of practice. Obviously, you want to practice and build these synergies, but from a pretty basic level, it's just like how well do two members of your team or three members of your team work together. So you can get a little more specific with that, and you can talk about role synergies that kind of are a little bit more forced. So you have like the Rein Zarya. That's a synergy that's very natural in the game. It's kind of you play those two heroes in conjunction together because the Zarya bubble enables the Rein to rest the shield, to take space, and it enables the Zarya to get more energy and be able to exert pressure from the safety behind the Rein shield. Other natural synergies are the Winston Diva combo, the Pharah Mercy combo, Genji Tracer. I mean, there are tons of heroes in this game that have synergy, but the ones I kind of just listed are kind of like the very almost like cheese synergies. They become very, very naturally. There isn't a ton of like forced synergy that happens there. It happens very naturally. And yeah, that kind of covers everything for synergies. Pathings, and I personally I struggle with pathings a little bit myself. I was actually talking to Coach Sexy the other day. If you guys know who that is, he's a contenders coach for Blank Esports. But I was just like, I don't understand pathings that well, and so I can give you a tier 2 definition of kind of what pathings are, what they're trying to accomplish. From a very general level, pathings are just how you get to the point. What route is your team taking to get you to the objective, or to hold an objective, or like what flank are we going to be? It's like how you could divide your team potentially. It's their pathings are there to give your team organization. They're there to make sure that everyone is kind of on the same page. And yeah, pathings, the goal of a good pathing is always to force your enemy team to rotate, trying to get them off of the area that they're holding, kind of make them kind of step off. And that comes in a bunch of different ways. That could be like the tracer touching point and forcing the defense to kind of rotate back. That could be your Winston and your Diva diving on high ground and forcing their tanks off. It comes in a lot of different ways. And another goal with pathing would always be kind of trying to get and trying to deal with some of the high priority targets. So like trying to find a path that could potentially get you onto the Widowmaker. Trying to find a path that could potentially expose this. And this is another topic that could have, hours of just theory behind it. From our team, from Sky Atlas or Atlas Sky, Neo Titan Gaming, we spend a lot of time in client and out of client talking about like the pathings we're going to take to the point, because this is a lot of like theory crafting that you're building. It's not a simple linear explanation of kind of what pathings are, what you're trying to achieve. It is very fluid.
Mm-hmm. There's
so
way too many variables that come into play.
Even now when we're working with our shot caller at Monocro, it's very reliant on his game sense and kind of understanding of like what win condition we're playing to in a certain comp and against a certain comp. So what pathing we really take to the point. And you can even go to a much more micro level. Someone that is only controlling like themselves, like we could have had a planned pathing, right? And a variable on the defense changes, and then our main tank or our off tank needs to adjust to what just happened, because the pathing we talked about, like that didn't account for the fact that the Widow played farther back on catwalk or something like that. So there's again, I'm getting too far down the rabbit hole on this one, but the pathings are very complicated, and there's a lot of potential conversation there to be had for sure. Rotations kind of go hand in hand with pathings to a small degree. They're planned or kind of in response to the movement from one position to another. This is kind of how you react a little bit to how the enemy like engages upon you. So I don't want to say that rotations are a response to what the enemy team's pathings are, but to a degree you might be able to kind of summarize it like that. But rotations are just how you kind of move as a unit, whether you're trying to out-rotate the team by like surrounding them, trying to get them into a clump. Is the rotation to stay very tight together and just move to a certain space. It's much more during the mid-fight, and we're about to talk about the stages of the fight, that you would kind of see the rotations happening in Overwatch. So the stages of the fight, it can be broken down in a couple of different ways, but you pretty much have the pre-fight, you have the mid-fight, and you have the post-fight. And kind of in between the pre-fight and the mid-fight, you have these engages and disengages. So the pre-fight, the posturing phase, the poke phase, whatever you want to call it, is how you're setting up for the fight, how you're pathing to get to the fight. It's everything that you're kind of doing before the actual engage starts. And this might even seem like a foreign concept to a lot of the people that have just been playing on the ladder for a long time, because the engages on the ladder, they don't have this natural flow until you really get into some of the higher elos. They typically just seem to be kind of hectic, and everyone's just kind of trading frags in no real organized manner. But in a competitive team environment, it is much more structured. If you lose one person, you're pretty much going to have to wait for the 30 seconds before their respawn is, because the odds you win a 5v6 are basically 0. So pre-fight is kind of what you're doing, posturing before the fight, trying to out-rotate the team a little bit, trying to catch them off guard. And then you have the engage, and that will usually be controlled, depending on the composition, by a movement ability or the expense of a couple abilities to kind of get you into the fight. You have the mid-fight, so that's pretty much the duration, the bulk, the meat of Overwatch. That's when you see these brawls happening in the GOATS comps. That's when you see the Widowmakers trading shots. This is the actual like kind of, it's the fast-paced Overwatch that you see where everyone has to make 1,000 decisions a second. And then you have the post-fight, and this is kind of when the fight's climaxed, when the fight's perceived as won or lost. This is kind of what you're doing to get you into the next fight. So very quickly, you'll usually have like a call. Someone's like, the fight's won, the fight's lost, and then you're starting to ult track again. You're starting to clean up. You're starting to disengage. You're back out. You're dying. You're wiping. This is just resetting you as quickly as possible for the next fight. So, kind of talking about like won and lost fights. Well, you have the next topic is comms and communication roles, and we'll go way in depth into this. I'm not even going to give you like the slightest clue as to what we do. I'm just going to define a few of the roles for comms and communication. So in general, if you've even played Overwatch, they have like a shot caller achievement that you can earn if people think you comm a lot or something. I don't even know what Overwatch was really trying to do with that latter shot caller award. But shot caller is the person who in the game does kind of lead the engages. They are usually the voice that is heard and listened to the most. They will call won-loss fights. They'll give you an idea of like what the team's trying to do, ergo kind of talking about win conditions or goals for each fight. They control pretty much the macro of Overwatch. The target caller, the next kind of biggest role most commonly used in all comm structures, is the person or persons that are designating targets to be eliminated. So this is usually like your Winston or your Tracer, someone who has a lot of vision, who can see a lot of the field, and also has the mobility, or is just going to be on a target that everyone can theoretically be on. Is ult tracking. Ult tracking is just a person that is delegated to track your own ultimates, kind of formulate a plan from the ults that you have. So basically just pressing tab and seeing what's available, and then being able to track the enemy team's ultimates. And this can be more than one person on your team. This could be a democracy, everyone tracking like the mirror, their counter, something like that. But it is just people on the team that are designated to relay information regarding the enemy teams or your team's ultimate. Callouts. There are a lot of callouts in Overwatch, whether it be positional, ults, health, just information that you can kind of relay to your team. So when you kind of do develop a comm structure, when you are playing for a long time in an organized team, you'll have to kind of get these universal callouts that your team understands. So I can't give you like terminology as to what a callout might look like for you guys, but if you've ever watched like Jane's stream, he talked about, everyone seems to know this one for some reason, even on the ladder I see this, the box on Watchpoint Gibraltar first point, it's a blue box on one of the high grounds, and that's like such a key point. Like everyone needs to know that call out blue box, because if you kind of control that space, you usually control that part of the map. So understanding important call outs is something that you're gonna have to do as a team. And then for the last one, I'm just gonna kind of define the different tiers in Overwatch. So you have tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Tier 1 is the Overwatch League. That is the professional level. That is, your Carpes, your Saviolis, your Jonax. These are the best, most highly paid, contracted players that are playing for the big orgs that you see every weekend, playing on the big screen, twitch.tv. You have contenders. This is kind of like your semi-pro level of Overwatch. They are also very strong players there. What really defines them as tier 2 is just the fact that they're in these Blizzard sanctioned contenders league. And how you reach contenders is by going through open division. And a lot of the teams in open division are classified as, or I shouldn't say a lot of them, some of them are classified as tier 3. And tier 3 has a very fuzzy kind of definition to it. There's no like one definition that really is like accepted as like to what is tier 3. Actually, Matrix has a really good understanding of it. Matrix, do you want to kind of define what tier 3 Overwatch is?
Yeah, so as stated, tier 3 used to have a much more defined definition, but when the path to pro was created, it kind of muddled it a bit, as the amount of higher tier tournaments kind of started dropping and open became the main kind of avenue for teams to be able to reach contenders. So when you place in the top of open, you have the option to go into contenders trials, and so the teams who are in contenders trials first off are generally recognized as tier 3. And the people who move on from that to contenders are recognized kind of as tier 2. There are top teams that are in open, so generally if you have a top 500 roster, you have a roster that has a lot of competitive Overwatch experience, perhaps in minor tournaments, or you're placing in the top of kind of smaller tournaments, stuff like that kind of classifies you to be in that tier 3 position. So if you go looking maybe into the top 10 Overwatch Open at the end of this Overwatch Open season, those would probably be classified in the kind of tier 3 scene.
All right, that sums up my little segment of talking about terminology. So if we want to get into next segment, which is also you.
Yeah, so I'm kind of going to go into what people use to measure skill for individual play versus team play, right? And I'm writing all this down as I speak, this kind of in this blurb thing, just to keep track of stuff. So for individual play, you essentially have mechanics. This is how kind of well your movements, your keyboard, mouse usage, all of that translates into the game. So if you're hitting nice combos, a lot of it be translated from your hands to your keyboard to the game, and that kind of translation process and how good you are at doing that is and how well you utilize your hero in that kind of role is defined as mechanics, right? You have game sense. Game sense is just kind of how well you perceive the world around you in the game through the different kind of inputs that you have, whether that's auditory, whether that's just kind of feeling based off the amount of time that's passed, visual, being able to see someone in the corner that you don't normally see, or just general awareness of what's going on around you. And then positioning is your actual physical positioning in the game. So as an example, if you're playing a Zenyatta, you might choose to have more passive positioning, whereas if you're playing a Genji, then you might want to do a lot more poking or maybe even a flank style of Genji. So that positioning is where your character's positioned and how kind of well that works in the composition that you're playing for the map that you're playing, based on what the enemy team composition is playing. So there's a lot that goes into that as well. But those are things that are all individual, so this can all be individually improved. Now, what we kind of need to go into now is the elements of team play, which are very, very different. And this kind of stuff can't be easily improved on your own, really, at all. So first off here is synergies, which is very, very important. Because, as we said earlier, if you're a bunch of really good players together, that doesn't mean that they're going to have a good team. Because what they need to have is they need to have these kind of elements here. And one of the most important of those is the synergies, right? So this happens between, as we specified, members of the team. If your team members don't like each other, then that can leak into your communications, that can leak into the atmosphere and just kind of make the team play more disjoint. So a lot of teams kind of end up having inner turmoil over members that dislike each other. So that kind of stuff has to be resolved. You have synergy between roles. So as an example, the support roles typically have to have synergies with each other, right? So you have your flex support and your main support, and your if your flex support gets dove and beyond Zenyatta, then your main support is Mercy. You should be able to properly peel for that, and knowing when that's going to happen, and kind of watching for that, preparing for that, and knowing where that flex support is going to be positioned is all part of that synergy and being able to effectively peel. And then of course you have synergy between heroes, which, as example covered, is Ryan Zarya, Winston, Diva. So these have kind of natural synergies, but you need to build synergies in your kind of play styles with those as well. Then you have communication, right? And this is how well you communicate on your team. And it's important to note that communication is more of a spectrum, right? You have too much communication. You can also have too little communication, right? If you're not communicating enough, if you see a Widowmaker set up and then you don't call it, and maybe your support player walks out and gets fragged by the Widow, that's something you need to communicate, right? But you can also have too much communication. So say that you have a bunch of people and they're all trying to call different targets in a fight. That's going to be very, very hectic, and no one's really not going to know, what's going on. So that's important as well. And then lastly, to kind of cover on this one is coordination. And this is kind of how well you can implement these individual play elements into this team play category, right? So how well you can kind of put your mechanics, your game sense, position to use within team play and kind of combine it with these other two roles here is really kind of what makes you a good player. And then kind of just some overall things to touch on as well. So you have coachability, which is how willing you are and how able you are to take criticism. If a coach comes to you and gives you a bunch of feedback and you take that and you get very defensive about it and you're not willing to implement that, then of course you're not very coachable and you're not going to have a lot of ease improving. At the high tier of gameplay, teams have multiple, sometimes 4 or 5 coaches that all are going to be giving you feedback and criticizing your gameplay, and so you have to be able to take that criticism for improvement. And on that kind of similar topic is attitude. And for this is kind of how you behave yourself in a competitive environment, which is also very, very different from, a ladder environment, but you can see that come out on ladder as well. So, you may be fine in scrims, but when you go into match play, you may have a very nervous or very kind of toxic attitude towards your team. So there's all different kind of attitudes you can have, but that's when you're doing playing a competitive environment, your attitude is very, very important to the overall performance of the team. If a member is playing fine and maybe there's some other member who's having a bad day and isn't able to play as consistently, and that other player's attitude comes out and he starts yelling at the other player, right, that's going to tilt the whole team and drop whole team performance. So that is something to keep in mind. That is very important. So players such as Soon are kind of noted as having a toxic attitude on their team, and you really don't want to be known for that. So those are kind of the elements that you want to focus on, that are kind of skill measurements to define how good you are as a player. So yeah, and then C is going to kind of move on route to talk about scrims and competitive and tournament match play and all that. So
Yeah, so my turn to talk.
Mhm.
So there are three main types of like how you can play Overwatch. There's obviously standard competitive play, which is in game. You have hopefully fun, and the best thing you can get out of competitive play. Yeah, I know, right?
No.
The best thing you can get out of competitive play is experience playing Overwatch. That's about all you're gonna get from it. It's hard to say, but it's just mainly for maintaining your mechanics, improving your mechanics, maybe learning a new hero, and that's about it. You're not going to get the team play element. You're not going to get the like actual competitive elements, and you get those more when you get in join a team and you start doing scrims, which are a lot more. It's an actual organized form of comp where everyone knows essentially knows what they're going to be doing, and instead of helping you just practice your mechanics, it helps you practice your game sense. You start to notice things and do things differently that you would in comp. You cannot play like in a actual scrim or tournament game. You cannot play it the same way you play competitive in Overwatch. It's a completely different game, and you do all these things by scrimming. You you improve your game sense. Your communication starts to go up depending on the role you're given, and you start to learn the proper way to position yourself and act, and how to properly play Overwatch down to its nitty gritty, instead of just having Torbjorn, Symmetra, Bastion, Hanzo on your
The
team,
standard.
and you're getting flamed for not picking the healer, right? You're not going to get that in a scrim-based environment. And the more you scrim and the more organized and cohesive your team becomes, you hit up the next level, which is match play or tournaments, which is taking everything you learned mechanically from comp, everything you learned like as an organized team play from scrims, and putting it all into a massive showcase of what you know you can do like as a team, not just as an individual player, but as a whole unit together. You can prove yourself and um, show off everything that you've been practicing in scrims and comp, essentially. So that's kind of like the layers of it. Comp will never get you anywhere in life. Scrims are where it all comes in, and tournaments are where you show off, essentially. And the feelings in between playing comp and playing in an actual tournament match are as different as night and day, because there's no real stress in a comp game other than your SR. But when it comes to tournaments, there's like real stuff on the line. So you have to get over that mental barrier too.
So, how do you improve as a team? Um, as we just talked about, one of the primary methods is scrimming. A good portion of the time allotted to you, the time available to you, should be used in a scrim environment, because that is the pretty much the best way to kind of get comfortable with your team, to get that feel of the team environment, and to get ready for tournament or match plays or whatever you're kind of prepping for. But you cannot just scrim. That's your time will be wasted after a certain point. You will not be getting as much value out of scrims as you could be if you kind of implement some of these other things into it. So VOD reviews. VOD reviews are huge. Whether it be again, you can go down a rabbit hole here with VOD reviews, but there are kind of different types of VOD reviews you can do, whether it be with your team or with an individual, with like your tank line or your support line, going over past games, talking about what worked well, what didn't work well, a certain shot call that was made, positioning that you were taking, an ult that you use, like anything. And just being able to go over that with your players, your team, it goes a long ways. And to kind of go on that, I'm again not trying to go too deep off on a tangent here. You do want to start setting goals within these VOD reviews, because it'll help give purpose to the scrims. So if your Winston keeps dying with Primal Rage, you'll be able to like set a goal for the next scrim. Like, okay, Winston, like we need to be using we can't keep dying over and over with Primal Rage, or is your diva not peeling to your Zenyatta enough? And so, okay, like diva for this week, like we're gonna focus on supporting our backline more, and obviously the players that coach are a lot. Like, it wouldn't be that simple or that remedial. It will get more advanced the kind of longer you guys are as a team, and the more experience these players have in a team environment. Along with VOD reviews, having theory crafting sessions and strategizing sessions is kind of the bulk of what it really means to be a team. And this can be as simple as, just like we said, talking about your pathings. It could be as complicated as cracking open a contenders level VOD and everyone breaking out a notepad, and we're just going to get deep into dive theory about why this hero was there, why that hero is there, why that doesn't work, why the Genji should be on fence and not on alley. Like, you could really get into depth with some of the theory crafting or strategizing. It really it depends a lot on how much time you have allotted to actually be as a team. Because if you have a bunch of guys that are only able to be there like 4 or 5 times a week, maybe even less, and only there for a couple hours, like you won't be able to really include too much of this. You're gonna have to kind of stick to the importance of just like making a team comp for each map, or like having like comps that we know are strong for uncertain. So it can be as complicated as like what I listed before, or as simple as just like, hey, we like to play this comp, like we're good at this comp. Let's go ahead and like plan on running this comp there and that comp there, just kind of getting some potential comps to run on certain maps. Other things to kind of improve as a team. We talked about synergies earlier. This is one thing I like to do with my players, is kind of having them duo on the ladder, sadly, but it has to have intent, right? You can't just be like, all right, my main support and my projectile DPS need to go duo on the ladder. No, it's like you guys need to go and duo on the ladder, playing Pharah and Mercy to practice when we're using boosters in relation to GA, and how to have max environment cover when playing against some of the range damage. You need practice on like these maps, and that forming that synergy with those two heroes by just a matter of like playing together on those two players playing on those two heroes. It comes with time, and you kind of force synergy a little bit by getting 2 or 3 players on ladder playing heroes that have that synergy that you're trying to build. Tournament play for handling adversity. So improving as a team, you're going to be in tournaments. So this is really the most ideal spot, and we kind of mentioned this earlier, for how you deal with adversity, how you deal with being under pressure. It's nothing that I can really coach. It's nothing that you can like read in a book. It's nothing that you can gain from playing on ladder. The only way to truly know how to handle this level of adversity, or this level of pressure, is to actually be in the game. There's in the tournament, you can scrim all you want, but people they won't handle that level of adversity. If someone messes up, then most people would just kind of shrug it off. But when it's down to like your Lucio has to beat half of the enemy team's blade, or you're going to lose the point and lose the match, like that's the kind of pressure, that's the kind of adversity that you are going to be dealing with. And all that preparation, all that stuff you worked for, I mean, that's kind of, it feels like it's on the line a little bit, because it is like, you practice all this time for like that one moment. Like you have to be comfortable, and no matter how much you've practiced, like you won't know what that's like until you're actually there. And then the last little tidbit for how to improve as a team, because that's still the tangent we're on, is these guys are you got to build trust. You got to build, as corny as it sounds, like a little bit of friendship, a little bit of camaraderie. So you can't just be playing Overwatch all the time. Like you want to get outside of the game. Like, I don't know, start a Christian Minecraft server or something. Like build some forts, dude.
Watch
Like
anime.
watch anime. Our team's a bunch of weebs, dude. Like a lot of these guys watch anime together. Like it's fun. Like you build a little bit of trust. Like get to know the players. Like these guys you're gonna spend a decent amount of time with if you are kind of serious about like getting in the team place.
In our case, 6 to 10 hours a day.
Yeah, and,
Right.
that's on the short end compared to like what the guys in Owl are doing or the contender scene.
Live next
They'll-
door in the
Yeah.
bedroom over
Yeah.
and play on the same,
Boy.
in the same room for 14 to 18 hours.
I just want to put my own little tidbit in on this relaxing,
sure.
outside of Overwatch with like the team or whatever.
Mhm.
I feel like once you get into team play, like competitive team play, a lot of people tend to forget that you're still playing a video game, and it's presumably a video game you have a lot of fun playing. And like, if you play so much and at such a high level and you're constantly trying to grind, a lot of people forget that you're supposed to still have fun playing this game. So relaxing and like taking time out, or like just even going in and playing quick play and insta locking Torb with a 6-stack of meta breaking heroes, just have fun and don't always stress so much about hitting like #1 in the next tournament, because it's never gonna make you feel better or improve you if that's all you ever think about.
Cover kind of the last, finish off the last few minutes of this hour. We're going to talk about how do you want to find a team, because fundamentally this is about improving in team play series, and so finding a team is definitely an important step in that.
That's probably step number 1.
Yeah. So
Put it.
yeah. So we're going to say how to find a team, and lots of you are probably going to already have teams that you're already on, so this isn't going to be as relevant for you, but it could be in the future. Say that you eventually do make it to the contenders level and you're trialing for teams and you're trying to find a team, this still applies to you. So at the base level, kind of the easiest way for specifically Overwatch, so you can utilize two of the main methods are through Discord or through Reddit, just because this is how teams communicate. Even contenders trials and stuff like that, even when Boston Uprising is trialing people or Fusion's trialing people, for their team, and they're taking open trials, that kind of stuff is announced on Discord and Reddit as well. So even at the highest level of play, they still use these platforms to kind of look for trials. So some examples of good Discord servers that you're able to join that are open, so there are some private ones that are well known, but as per the open ones that you can join, today, so there's r/Overwatch LFT, and this is also a subreddit, but they have their Discord server as well. There's Cow League, which is a Discord server. There's Road to Grandmaster Plus, which is a server. There's r/Overwatch, which is both Discord and Reddit, as well as r/competitive Overwatch. There is AEO, which is what, amateur esports organization or something like that. There is also the official Overwatch Open Discord, which to find that you can go and search up Overwatch Open, and you'll be able to find their official Discord server. This is run by Blizzard, has all the Overwatch admins on it, all that kind of stuff, and they have scrim finding, team finding, all that's in there as well. But these are kind of the main most prominent popular servers, regardless of your region, to look for teams. So there are two things that you should be on the lookout for. So there's LFT, which is looking for team, and this is basically you advertise. I'm terrible at writing. You advertise yourself. This is your role, your SR, your experience, your schedule, your platform, and your region. And some teams also want your age. And then there is looking for player. which is where a team posts their advertisement, right? And this is kind of you search for teams that are looking for players, and then you contact them. So we're looking for team, they contact you. We're looking for player, you contact them. And then what you do, when you communicate a team and you land at a tryout spot, they like you, they maybe interview you, and you land a tryout. So initially teams do some sort of tryout session. They should do multiple ones, at least to make sure you're the right fit, but not all teams do, because that's also very time intensive. But you essentially play with them. Yeah, generally, the 6 to 8 hours to kind of just find out how players are, is good. At a contenders level, they will do more in-depth trials. They might trial you 10 to 12 hours. They might, just to make sure you're right fit, they might trial you for 30 minutes and find that you're, not the right fit for them. So these lengths will vary, but you should do multiple tryout sessions just to ensure that you are good for a team. Not just because the team wants to make sure to find the right player, but because you want to make sure that you find the right team to play on. If you play with a team and they're good the first session, you go against a 4K team and you're trialing for a 4.2K team, you're probably going to roll them. But let's say then your 4.2K team faces a 4.4K team. How do they handle that adversity? Maybe they tilt really, really hard when they're losing and you didn't know that before. You don't want to be on that team. So, it is good to get these kind of multiple sessions, see how people handle different elos that they're facing, how they fare in different conditions, that kind of stuff. That's very important.